Welcome to a Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, where we discuss mysteries, histories, and occasionally conspiracies. I'm your host, Ollie.
And I'm your co-host, Belle.
This is the case of Joan Risch, a housewife and mother of two who disappeared from her home in October of 1961.
Today's trigger warnings are death, foster care, sexual abuse of a minor, sexual assault, suicide, and mental illness. If any of these topics make you uncomfortable, turn away!
Skip this one. And I also wanted to give a heads up that there's lots of unconfirmed information in this one. I've tried to sort of mention when I couldn't confirm stuff, like when stuff is especially unconfirmable, but just most
so
things,
loud.
just like assume that most things are not 100%, like
accurate.
Potentially, yeah. And this was a weird one and an interesting one. And put your thinking caps on because we're going to be using our little gray cells today. Joan was born as Joan Carolyn Bard on May 12th, 1930 in Brooklyn, New York. When she was either 9 or 10, but most sources say 9. Both of her parents died in a fire shortly after within a year of them moving to New Jersey. Joan was reportedly visiting relatives at the time and was physically unharmed. She was then sent to live with her aunt and uncle, who fostered her for the rest of her life. In some sources, they were kind of described as her foster parents, but in most sources, they were described as her aunt and uncle. She became Joan Carolyn Nattrass, I think is how it's pronounced. And she even had a new social security card under that name.
Which is weird.
And it is considered her maiden name is Nattrass. So she spent a little bit of time in foster care between her parents' death and moving with her aunt and uncle. And later on in her life, she confided in a friend that she was sexually abused by the foster father. But charges were never pressed,
Mm-hmm.
And later sources describe the house fire as suspicious, but
duly noted.
Never elaborated on. So Joan had brown hair, blue eyes. She was white. She was 5'7", but I also have seen 5'1". I would believe 5'7" more, honestly.
Okay, hold on. This is the 1930s. A lot of people were underfed and underdeveloped.
That's true. I think, hold on, because I've got, this guy has her husband's testimony.
Because I was going to say, from there, other than her being petite, you just described me.
I'm wondering, honestly, if I misread a 1 as a 7 somewhere.
5'7".
Okay. All right. Maybe I read a 7 as a 1,
I literally just said how tall was Joan Risch, and
okay.
It said 5'7".
She would also break out in a rash on her neck when she was nervous, and her husband said she had to use medication to get the rash to clear up. Which is weird. I've never heard of that before. But she had a degree in English literature from Wilson College in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania, that she got in 1952.
Good for her.
Yep, she graduated with honors, and again, 1952. So this, it was, her graduating college was not the default expectation.
Yeah.
She started her career as a secretary, and then worked up to an editorial assistant at Harcourt, Brace and World, and then moved on to Thomas Y. Cromwell Company, where she was also an editorial assistant. She was an avid reader, a poet. She checked out over 25 books from the local library in the summer of 1961. She was described as thoughtful, quiet, sincere. She worked really hard, and she liked to kind of stay with the crowd, follow what most other people were doing.
Yeah.
In 1954, she meets Martin Risch at a Harvard football game, where Harvard is where Martin was a student, which, damn son. They were apparently kind of set up for a blind date by Joan's roommate. And her roommate knew what was up because they hit it off immediately. And they were immediately smitten with each other. They dated long distance for 2 years, which is a long fucking time in the 1950s.
Yeah, I was say they really liked each other.
It's a long time now. It's especially a long time in the 1950s.
Yeah. Sweeter back then, though.
Yeah. They got married on December 26th in 1956 in Long Island. I just realized that is after 2 years of long distance dating. So, like, literally just went in, got married after 2, like, damn.
Okay, but to be fair, that's kind of like how things were. Because, like,
oh, we're out of college now.
Because, let's see, my grandparents were 44 and 46, 1944 and 1946. So they got married when they were, just remember this was a long time ago, they were 16 and 18.
Which that isn't a massive gap, but young.
Young.
So they got married in 1956 in Long Island, and then they lived in Ridgefield, Connecticut. And in 1959, their first child, Lillian, a daughter, was born. Shortly before she was born, Joan left her job to become a homemaker and stay-at-home mom. And then a year later, their son, David, was born. She eventually kind of started, the plan was always that she would return to work when the kids were older. And later on, she started talking about maybe becoming a teacher when that time came. She, or the whole family, I mean, moved to Lincoln, Massachusetts in April of 1961. Lincoln is pretty close to Boston. They bought a home on Old Bedford Road, and Joan immediately became active in the community, active in the League of Women Voters, and the family settled in really, really well into the community. Like, they just fit right in.
Yeah.
They immediately, like, you'll hear, they already knew their neighbors. They already had friends. Like, they just, like a missing puzzle piece. Like,
yeah. Right on.
Like the dream. And I thought that this was funny, so I thought I would include it. This snippet is from a town forum that was published by the League of Women Voters in June of 1961. So, like, right after they moved.
Yeah.
Quote, "They called us Niptown because Lincoln was made up of pieces nipped out of Concord, Lexington, and Weston. That was Lincoln's first region. Since these days, in the middle of the 18th century, the town has settled down behind its old stone walls to run its affairs in its own practical way." End quote. I might have read that with some really weird, like...
You said these instead of those was the only thing.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, those days in the middle of the 18th century. Okay. So Martin became an executive at the Fitchburg Paper Company. And in 1961, Joan was 30 years old, and she spent most of her days gardening, spending times with her kids, keeping the house clean and cared for, reading, and visiting the library. She was, from what it sounds like, not necessarily outgoing, but she wasn't an introvert either. It didn't sound like she liked...
private, but involved.
She liked listening to people, it sounded like. She liked being with people. But she was described as, like, quiet. So...
Makes sense.
So to round this all, October 24th, 1961, the day begins. It is a Tuesday. At about 6:50 in the morning, Martin left the house to make an 8 a.m. flight for a business trip to New York, where he planned to stay overnight in Manhattan. He, like, already had the reservations for the hotel, everything like that. He said that Joan was still asleep when he left, but afterward, or at least in bed,
Yeah.
But later on, she wakes up the kids and makes them breakfast, gets dressed in a blouse, sweater, black wool skirt, and shoes that were blue, but they are varyingly described as heels, flats, or sneakers with white piping.
Okay.
At about 9:30, Joan drops David off with their neighbor that lived across the street, Barbara Barker, who's important, so remember her name.
Okay.
And she then takes Lillian with her to get a cavity filled at a dentist in Bedford. So Barbara Barker had a 4-year-old. So David is 2, by the way, and Lillian is 4 at this point in time.
Okay.
Barbara Barker had a 4-year-old son, Douglas, who was pretty close with Lillian.
Mm-hmm.
And they played around a lot. So it was very, very common for the 2 women to just like drop one of their children off.
Mm-hmm.
Like, hey, take this kid for a second.
Yeah. I get you.
When she was at the dentist, it was Joan getting the cavity filled, by the way.
Oh.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the doctor said that she didn't seem worried or depressed. It sounded to me like Lillian might have been in the room.
Mm-hmm.
Which I mentioned because it comes in later. And Lillian was described as like, she was on her best behavior. She was really well behaved that day, which is why I think she was probably in the room, because otherwise I don't know if it makes sense.
Yeah, no, I understand. I getcha.
So Joan makes a follow-up appointment for the next week and then takes off. They run some errands in Bedford in their blue Chevy. I think the family had 2 cars, and one was like technically Joan's and one was technically Martin's.
Mm-hmm.
So they did some shopping, and Joan may have cashed a check, and then they come back home and pick up David at around 11.
Okay.
When she picked up David, she chats a bit with Barbara, who said that she seemed like she was in, quote, extremely good spirits, and talked about how well the dentist did, basically like praised his work, which I think is really funny.
Yeah.
I don't know that I would ever go over and be like,
wow, that dentist did a great job.
I mean, I might tell you, I have this cavity filled, and like, this is a true story, by the way. They didn't polish it all the way.
Oh, that's annoying.
And I was like, it's fine because like I'm probably just imagining things and it'll polish off, but it's still like a little gritty, which is weird. This was months ago. Anyway, so when they were gone, the milkman, garbage collector, and mailman had all dropped by and noticed nothing weird about the home/property.
Mm-hmm.
The milkman had dropped off. This was at the time when you just dropped off milk. He dropped off milk at their side door that I think led into the kitchen. And the mailman had dropped by either 4 or 5 letters. It sounded like they didn't remember exactly how many because they probably have a shit ton of mailboxes.
Gross,
yeah. So the regular... Okay, I wrote mailman. It might have been milkman. One of them, the regular one, had been out at the time, like on vacation.
Mm-hmm.
And they had, someone filling in for him on October 24th. But when the regular mailman, I think it was mailman, returned, he mentioned that he had seen an unfamiliar car in the driveway on October 19th, the previous week. Yes, I'm almost certain it has to be the mailman because I think the milkman would drop by more regularly. Because this was a Tuesday and the 19th was a Thursday.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know how often milk was delivered. But, okay. So this car was described as a dirty 2-tone General Motors car. Okay. And it may have been blue and gray, but blue is cited more often than not, if that makes sense. Blue is cited more often than gray.
That makes a lot of sense because a lot of cars back then were actually more commonly like the actual
2-tone
colors.
Oh yeah.
As opposed to black, gray, taupe, white.
Yeah. After they returned, there were 2 tradesmen. I don't know what the fuck that means. That
electrician, plumber.
Okay. That said she looked like she was in good spirits. Generally, she was described as like in a very good mood this day.
Mm-hmm.
At about 11:15, their regular dry cleaner drops by to pick up some of Martin's suits.
Crazy.
I know, this is wild. Like, everybody just drops by to pick up stuff. He actually entered the house to pick up these suits, which was apparently pretty normal for him to do. He said Joan often just like left the door unlocked, and it almost sounded to me in some of the sources that she didn't mind if he just went ahead and walked in if she was out.
That's crazy.
Yeah. So he was in the house for about 5 minutes to do so and claimed nothing seemed unusual to him about the house or Joan or the kids. At around noon, Joan made a lunch of sandwiches. I wonder almost if this is kind of, if this particular time is a little bit off, because apparently she usually put David down for a nap at about noon. So it may have been that she made lunch earlier and then they finished at around noon, if that makes sense. So he usually, per Martin, he usually slept until about 2.
Gotcha.
Which it was wild, like him describing them as the boy usually. I was like, bro. He seemed like he was generally described as like a good dad. I think it was just like a thing.
Boy.
Yeah, a thing at the time that they just described their children as like the boy and the girl.
Well, yeah. I mean, to be fair, like in my family still, we actually refer to certain, like, you know,
the boys,
Bubba.
Yeah. Okay.
Like, that's still a thing in my family. Like, there's one of my cousins who's literally, for the most, I call him by his name, but everybody else is like, hey, Bubba.
So, at around 1 to 1:20, Barbara either watches or actively brings Douglas, her 4-year-old son, over to play with Lillian.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes it's described as like she watched from the window as he walked across the street. Sometimes it's described that she like actually brought him over. This is what I'm talking about with like most of the things are like not super consequential, the differences between the sources, but some of them are.
I get you.
So Joan the kids played outside and Joan went outside to prune some plants, do some light yard work. The kids said she might have mowed the lawn. And she also might have read a little bit in the kitchen, watching them out the window. At around 1:55, Joan takes Lillian and Douglas to Douglas's front yard and drops them off without telling Barbara that she's done this, which didn't sound like it was necessarily unusual, but it did sound like she usually did at least wave.
Because this is actually now the 60s, not the 50s.
Yes.
60s. Either way, still 60s.
Yep. So she told Lillian that she would be back, and then she walks back across the street back home. And it is important to mention that where the kids were in the yard, they couldn't see the Risch home. Where Barbara was in the home, she could.
Mm-hmm.
But only through, like, trees, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So at around 2:15, which this only just occurred to me, David usually woke up at around 2.
Mm-hmm.
So around 2:15, Barbara Barker witnesses Joan through the trees between their homes. She said she left the home wearing a trench coat. She saw something red, variously described as in front or around her, also described as she may have been carrying it.
Mm-hmm.
And she also may have had her arms outstretched in front of her. She walked quickly to her car, then back towards the garage, and appeared dazed, was walking quickly.
Mm-hmm.
She did not see her leave the property, and she didn't feel like anything was seriously wrong. She kind of just assumed she was chasing David. So, a quote from Barbara from the police report is, "I saw Joan about 2:30 p.m. I saw her running beside her car. She had a trench coat on at the time. I saw something red. I thought that she was chasing a child and the child was wearing a red jacket. She was running with her arms outstretched. Later, I saw her walk back towards the house. Later on, it seems to me that when she ran to the... later on in the...
Statement.
Yeah. She says, it seemed to me that when she ran to the car, she went back to the house again. I did see something red. This was about 2:15. So it was between 2:15 and 2:30. And I really do think in these statements, they aren't recording whether or not the police, the officer interviewing them, is like asking questions, but it does seem to me like some of this is answering questions.
Yeah, prompt.
Because otherwise it doesn't seem like how people talk.
Mm-hmm.
At about 3 p.m. or a little bit after, their next door neighbor, Virginia Keene, gets off the school bus, and then as she's walking home, she claims to see an unfamiliar car parked in front of the Risch home while she's walking home. I already said that.
Did Virginia... How old is Virginia Keene?
It didn't say, but it seemed... I got the feeling like teenager.
Okay.
Because she was able to kind of make statements in this. It is possible she described it as a dirty two-tone, possibly gray and blue General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
I cannot confirm. That's one that I am especially wobbly on. But it is... She did say that she saw an unfamiliar car in the Risch driveway. Police later claimed that this was an unmarked police car that was actually there later in the day, and that Virginia is remembering the times a little bit wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But it is also really weird to me that other people have claimed to see this car.
Yeah.
Virginia and her mother, or another neighbor who was driving home down the road, said that she had stopped to let a car out of either the Keene or the Risch driveway, but Virginia and her mother claimed that there was no car in the driveway at the time. In the Keene driveway. At 3:40ish, Barbara sends Lillian home. She kind of drops her off in front. Like, she doesn't actually see Joan, but she believes that she is home.
Okay.
And then she takes her children, Douglas, and she may have had another. She takes them out shopping. So Lillian returns home and finds that her mom is gone, and then she returns to Douglas's home. Some sources say she ran over screaming, but Barbara says she was gone at the time, you know? Yeah. So some sources also say, like, this is very, very commonly said, that she said the phrase, "Mommy is gone and the kitchen is covered in red paint." That is not anywhere in Barbara's statement.
Interesting.
What the statement does say is, I took 4-year-old Lillian across the street about 3:45 p.m. Then I went to Concord to do some shopping. I came back about 4:15, which, by the way, that's a quick-ass shopping trip.
Yes.
Lily came in and said that I can't find Mommy, David's in bed, and the place is messed up. So Barbara goes over, hears David crying upstairs, discovers the kitchen covered in blood. Then she quick runs the kids over to a neighbor's, goes to look for Joan, and when she can't find her, she returns home to call the police at 4:33. And then before I get into the investigation, we're going to pause for some ads. So the call from Barbara is received at 4:33. Sergeant Mike McHugh arrives at around 4:40. So he was showing up expecting a suicide for some reason. But he looked around, couldn't find a body, and called backup because it seemed sketchy. Yeah, you know.
Mm-hmm.
In the kitchen, there was blood on the walls, floors. It was later confirmed to be type O, which Joan was type O, but they didn't have DNA testing at the time. Okay. So they couldn't 100% confirm it was Joan's blood, but
it was supposed.
Yes. They basically used the type to say it's Joan's blood.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So the telephone was removed from the wall, potentially ripped from the wall, and placed in a trash can. If we go back over to our photos, Hey everyone, this is Ollie from the future. I was just coming in to let you know we're talking about the pictures of the scene, specifically of the Risch kitchen, right here. And we've decided that because it looks so gory, there's so much blood, we've decided not to post it on our social media. So if you decide to look it up, like if you want to have the pictures in front of you for reference, you can absolutely do that. They're super easy to find. But we just didn't necessarily feel comfortable. We couldn't necessarily figure out a way to post it on our social media in a way that only the people that are comfortable with seeing it can see it. So, I mean, if you have any ideas about that, hit us up. But until we figure something out, you can always look these pictures up. They're always super easy to find online. So I liked that one because you can see kind of where the trash can is. And I liked the one next to it if you go that way, because you can see the phone receiver on the wall. And the phone is disconnected from there is no cord attached to the phone. Yeah. And it is like across the room.
Yeah,
this trash can. And this trash can also lived either under the sink or in the corner. And it had been moved to
the middle of the room.
Yeah, basically, to put this phone in. The telephone book is sometimes how it's described. It was open to the emergency numbers section. 911 was not implemented until 1968. So 911 didn't exist at the time. So you would have to have written down your own emergency numbers stuff. I heard from a lot of sources that this was like basically one of those phone books that you fill out yourself, and that the emergency numbers page was actually empty.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
Yeah. So the kitchen table was also overturned, which you can see in the photos. Chairs were scattered across the room. Basically,
the kitchen table was overturned?
Yes. Oh, no, I see. Yeah. No, a kitchen table. Like, there's kind of a corner.
I saw the other table. I was just like, the kitchen table?
Yeah.
It's still bugging
me. The dining room table
This is stupid.
Was not overturned. And there is a table in the hallway. I don't know exactly what that means. But
potentially basically signs. Yeah.
Yeah. They came in and they kind of saw signs of struggle. Mm-hmm. There were several fingerprints and handprints in the blood on the walls in the kitchen. There was a thumbprint on the phone mount, 2 fingerprints and a partial palm on the wall. Joan's fingerprints weren't on file, so they couldn't verify them to be hers. But some sources did say that the authorities were able to determine through some means they weren't hers. And potentially if they were like really big prints and she had really small hands.
Yeah.
Maybe, but I don't know for sure.
Or maybe they were able to like verify them against, well, you said in the blood.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, I'm not sure. It's also possible though that one of the fingerprints might have been identified. I saw this in, I think, the FBI file. Not totally sure. Says fingerprints, one of which identified as that of redacted, whose presence redacted has been definitely established. I wonder if that belongs to Lillian, because she was in the house. Or it also could have belonged to Barbara or one of the other neighbors who also did go looking for her.
But it is weird that they would redact it if it wasn't a kid.
That is true.
Because I can see them redacting it because of a minor, but I cannot see them redacting it for anyone else.
What I will say about that particular file, when I was reading it, they also redacted Martin Risch's name. Like, they said Joan Risch, husband or wife of redacted, which is weird to me.
That is weird.
Yeah, it's the same.
That's weird.
So yeah, there was a trail of blood leading from the kitchen into David's room up to the crib, then one potentially back out to the kitchen. They couldn't really tell for certain whether it led from the kitchen to David's room or from David's room to the kitchen. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And David, by the way, was unharmed but crying, and he probably, I think, Barbara said he needed to be changed. Which, to be fair, this was like 40 minutes after he usually woke up. Or no, it was almost 3 hours after he usually woke up.
Yeah.
So.
Not only was he probably needing to be changed, he was probably fucking hungry.
Yeah. There was also another trail of blood from the kitchen out to Joan's car in the driveway. On the car, they found a couple of blood drops on the hood and trunk, but there were nowhere in the house or outside were there any bloody footprints. No footprints in the blood whatsoever. The police suspected that that was intentional, but I also don't know, like, I'm thinking Joan may have not stepped in the blood because she didn't want to track it around anymore. You know what I mean? And an attacker may have not stepped in the blood because they didn't want to leave any evidence.
Right.
But it seems weird to me if she was really in a daze that she would be thinking about not tracking blood. But maybe it was just so ingrained in her, like, I spend all day cleaning this house, I don't want to, you know, you don't step in the wet thing on the floor.
Yeah.
They were not 100% able to determine whether the blood trail started, like I said, upstairs or in the kitchen, but they believed it was most likely in the kitchen. I think because that's where most of the blood was, and it's where it looked like there might have been a struggle. Several paper towels, you can see, like, there's a whole roll on the floor in the pictures.
Yeah.
There were several paper towels and then a pair of David's overalls that were covered in blood. So authorities, that led them to believe that someone had tried to clean it up with, they said with the overalls and also the paper towels. I almost wonder, though, if David's overalls were just on the floor and then they got bled on.
Yeah.
Or if they, like, fell into it, you know. Because it seems weird to me that, we'll get into that. So the total amount of blood, depending on the source that you look at, was determined to be either about 1 pint or about 1/2 pint of blood. Most sources, I will say, do say 1/2 pint. So, yeah, the authorities do believe that somebody tried to clean up the blood, but they definitely kind of gave up pretty quick.
Well, no, what I mean is that this kind of looks like the overalls might be there, because if you're talking about a 2-year-old, those overalls are not very big, especially if they're crumpled.
Oh, that's a good point.
So that, to me, that looks like
there's also, I think you can see, I think that those are the overalls. I'm not 100% sure, but they look like they could be overalls to me.
Yeah, maybe. Anyway, sorry, moving on.
But it's hard to tell scale in these pictures.
Yes.
Anyway, so basically the amount of blood, authorities said they believed that she suffered a superficial wound. It wouldn't have caused her death, and they did not believe that she was shot or stabbed. The amount of blood spread everywhere, some of the authorities said they thought it almost looked like someone was trying to make it look worse than it was. There was no weapon at the scene or ever found. Authorities were kind of split on whether they believed it was an abduction or if she left of her own accord. They searched the surrounding woods with bloodhounds. They called a bunch of local hospitals to see if anybody was admitted with her description, and they basically, like, left her description and said, like, call us if anybody does show up. At about 5:15, either Barbara or Sergeant McHugh calls Martin's company, the Fitchburg Paper Company, to ask where he is. They find, whoever did call, finds out he's in New York. They kind of explain the situation, and he flies back on the same night. Like, he literally takes the next flight he can out. And then just, these are random pieces of evidence I wasn't sure where else to put. When they questioned neighbors, nobody ever said that they heard any screaming, crashing, or saw a struggle.
Yeah, and with how close Barbara
was like, kind of paying attention. There were 4 letters still in the mailbox, which may have been all the mail that was dropped off.
Mm-hmm.
Authorities and the husband realized later that one of Joan's coats, a kind of gray cloth long one, was missing, but the trench coat and her purse were still there.
Mm-hmm.
The trench coat she was wearing when Barbara saw her outside.
Which is odd.
Yes. There were also there was a liquor bottle in the trash can that Martin says they finished the night before. And there were also, remember this is a Tuesday, there were also several empty beer bottles in the trash can.
Mm-hmm.
And Martin seemed, in his statement, he seemed kind of baffled that they were there, because he said they did have some friends over on the weekend that had finished some beer bottles, but he seemed like he was pretty convinced she would have cleaned out the trash.
Yeah, well, and it's a very small trash can.
Yes, it is an extremely tiny trash can.
Well,
and it doesn't look like it even has a trash bag.
The liquor
is on top.
Well, but that's not a beer can.
No, that looks like a...
Because that's definitely a liquor bottle.
I don't know. I'm not...
Because that's not beer.
So, some sources put a lot of weight into the beer cans, and some sources... Or beer bottles, I mean. And some sources didn't mention them at all. So, it's... Like, they were definitely there because they are in Martin Risch's statement.
Yeah.
But I think... Because he also said... He basically said Joan had a regular schedule for when she took out all the trash in the house. But he did not say that he saw her take out the trash in the kitchen.
Yeah.
So it would be interesting to know who put the liquor bottle in the trash can, because if it was him, I would put more weight on his statement that he didn't think they were there before. You know what I mean? That he didn't think they were supposed to be there. But if Joan put the liquor bottle in the trash can, then it's possible he hadn't seen the trash can for a while, especially if it lived under the sink. It's not something he's like walking by, you know?
Right, yeah.
Additionally, there were a lot of tips following the disappearance. It is important to mention the last confirmed sighting of Joan was by Barbara at about 2:15. So we can't necessarily confirm these sightings. This is another...
We also can't rule them out.
They are, and some of them seem reasonable. So at about 2:45, a woman in similar clothing and fitting Joan's description, looking messy, wearing a white handkerchief around her head, hunched over like she was cold, was seen walking west down Route 2A, which was about 300 yards from their home.
Okay.
So this is about half an hour after Barbara saw her. And again, Barbara saw her wearing the trench coat. The trench coat was in the house. So a neighbor reported seeing a gray Oldsmobile sedan parked in her driveway behind the Risch's car at around 3:20. Between 3:15 and 3:30, a woman in similar clothing and fitting her description, with blood running down her legs, walking or running north down the median of Route 128. She was described as disoriented and perhaps clutching something at stomach level. This was about 5 to 6 miles from the home, and she was seen walking across 2 lanes of traffic. What I will say, though, about this sighting, when you are hunching over like you are cold, you are kind of clutching your stomach too. So really, either of these, perhaps she was cold and the person who saw her the second time thought she was holding something to her stomach, or maybe she was holding something to her stomach and the first person who saw her thought that she was cold.
Right, yeah.
So that is Route 128. Just so that I'm being very clear. It's not 12A as in the letter. It's 128 as in the number. So at around 4:30, she was also, same woman fitting description, was seen walking south along the west side of Route 128, 2 lanes from the median, So
Okay.
basically,
Yeah.
about 4 miles from her home in Waltham, near the Cambridge Reservoir.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, if all of these sightings are of the same person, it looks like she walked away from her house, crossed 2 medians, and then started walking back towards her house. Some callers reported that this woman had blood running down her legs, or running down the backs of her legs.
Mm-hmm.
She appeared disoriented, disheveled, was holding something against her abdomen. She may or may not have had a scarf or a handkerchief kind of tied over her head, and may or may not be kind of hunching over. I try really hard not to get mad at witnesses. But this is along, obviously, a very busy street. Not a single person stopped to help her.
Mm-hmm.
And then sightings did not continue after these ones. So, I also wanted to mention while I was reading Martin's police statement that I saw this that I thought was actually kind of interesting when you think about these sightings. So he said, at times, if it was a nice day, she might take the children for a walk along the roadway. This was in a rare case as she was afraid of heavy traffic on our road.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really interesting to me that she did occasionally take her kids for walks down the road. I would be interested to know if that's kind of the route that she usually took.
Yeah. No, yeah. That'd be very interesting.
Mm-hmm. So, of course, the authorities searched the entire area, including they sent divers into the reservoir, the Cambridge Reservoir. They didn't find any evidence of Joan or anyone matching her description.
Mm-hmm.
I did just realize, this is basically 6 miles, this route that this person took, hypothetically.
Yeah.
Which would be a very long way for a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
So,
well, and you're also assuming that she didn't have a carrier or something that was pushing them.
But I don't know. For Lillian, I'm not 100%. Well, no, 4-year-olds are still. I guess I don't know how old children are.
You realize that sometimes.
The authorities searched this whole area, including divers in the Cambridge Reservoir. They didn't find any evidence of Joan or anyone matching her description. The FBI and also departments in other states were notified, but nothing turned up. The FBI bowed out pretty early because it sounded like they wanted to help, but they couldn't figure out a way
to have the authority to be helpful,
to have jurisdiction, because there was
it wasn't
evidence of a federal crime. Yeah. So they kind of their hands were tied is basically how it was. Flower chip. So they were able to rule out the milkman, the mailman, the dry cleaning service delivery driver, and Martin, because all of them had alibis.
Okay.
They were also able to determine or able to rule out, Barbara. I think, a door-to-door salesman. Not a salesman. He was basically trying to get people to sell their houses. So a national park, I think, could be built.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
So kind of like the opposite of a door-to-door salesman.
Yeah.
Who Joan did talk to, and it sounded like they didn't really suspect he had anything to do with it.
Okay.
But I couldn't tell for sure that they had 100% ruled him out as a suspect at all. So
what I find interesting is they didn't clear Barbara.
We'll get into that. Okay.
Oh, okay.
So there was a reward offered by the town of Lincoln for any info leading to her discovery. It was $500, which is almost $5,000 today. It went unclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
The Boston Record American, which is a newspaper, offered a $5,000 reward, which today would be a little over $49,000. Okay. Which, damn. Also went unclaimed.
Mm-hmm.
So, theories. Did she have a lover? I'm gonna say this is most like, it really seems to me like the main reason that people consider this theory is because of the car.
Yeah.
But really, there isn't much evidence of it.
Mm-hmm.
No one who knew the couple, and specifically Joan, really thought it was very likely. And they had only been living in Lincoln for 6 months, which most sources, a lot of people say, like, that's not enough time to start an affair, but she had also grown very close to, like, Barbara. She had really settled into the community. So I don't necessarily think that is as good a point as, like, that nobody really thought it was likely.
Yeah.
Obviously, because of the car, this would be an easy solution. So the two-tone car also may have been seen at the house earlier in the week. So a lot of people were saying, like, maybe it was a lover, maybe it was a friend. Basically, all these theories, though, say that she was killed and maybe raped. Maybe she was having an affair or was just having a friend over,
Mm-hmm.
and she took Lillian across the street because she was old enough that she could have been able to communicate that, like, oh, there was a man over earlier. Beer bottles could also lend credence to this. Drinking could make a bad situation worse,
Mm-hmm.
impairs judgment. And the bottles were almost certainly not tested for drugs because of the time period. So she could have been drugged. Also worth mentioning, again, David wakes up at around 2, usually on most days.
Right.
Joan took Lillian and Douglas back over
At 2:15.
at 1:45.
I thought it was 2:15.
It was 2:15 that Barbara saw her.
Ah.
So, like, it's weird to me that she would get one kid out of the house right when the other is about to wake up, which, again, maybe it is just that David couldn't have communicated because he's 2.
Which, if it was a violent situation, my first thought is, if someone had broken into the house and was trying to hurt her, then she'd be like, I will cooperate with you, but I want to take these 2 over here, and they could have potentially
Hold that thought. Hold that thought.
Okay.
Okay. Later. Okay. I promise. So, other against this theory, would a lover have parked in the driveway?
Right.
Multiple times?
Mm-hmm.
Potentially, some people suggest maybe he usually kind of hid it somewhere else, but moved it closer to the house if Joan was injured or killed.
Right.
My speculation, if this theory is correct, maybe he parked out front because he knew he was going to hurt her.
Mm-hmm.
Joan was also said, Martin said she was very susceptible to door-to-door salesmen, which I think is kind of funny. Seems like he's like, fine.
Yeah.
But would it have necessarily been suspicious to see an unfamiliar car if this area was, like, popular with door-to-door salesmen?
Mm-hmm. Solicitors.
Yeah. At about 8 p.m., a car matching that description, the two-toned, dirty, may have been spotted by a road, up somewhere, to gather branches and put them back into the car, which could, some people speculate, is like to cover a body or bloodstains within the car. In the police report, it looks like they identified who this person was and ruled him out.
Oh, really?
But I also don't know for sure that that's all, that it was the same car. Do you know what I mean? Like, it was kind of hard to understand.
Well, and it's such a
all
broad
based on telegrams
description.
Yeah. Joan, potentially, if this is true, may not have screamed because she didn't want to draw attention to like a compromising scene.
Mm-hmm.
This, people think it is more likely she would have tried to call for an ambulance or the police if the attacker was not a stranger, which is, potentially true. Because if it's a stranger, maybe you would scream and run. But I also think it is equally possible that whoever opened the, open to the emergency number section
Mm-hmm.
was not familiar with that book. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that it was
Going to be
somebody
blank.
who was in the house.
Yeah.
Because Joan would have known that that page was blank.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe she was just so panicked she didn't remember in the moment.
Right.
But
well, I'd be curious to know if it was just like a composition notebook, or if it was like
it sounds to me like it was intended to be a phone, intended
like
to be
in
like
class.
a contact book. You know what I mean?
Well, because my point is with contact books, you either have where they're like a composition notebook where they're kind of single bound, or you have it where it's spiral. Because
Okay.
realistically, if you were a killer trying to cover up your tracks, wouldn't you rip out of the page? Now, in a composition notebook, that would be exceedingly obvious that was the case. But in
the books I'm seeing are more like,
well, and that's
bound.
not even, that's a 6-pack case.
Yeah. I don't know. I can't see the book in any of these.
Yeah, the books that I'm seeing are more like,
yeah. I don't know
books.
how common spiral binding was in the 1960s.
Yeah.
But
anyway.
But that is a good point. Yeah. I hadn't thought about that. I'm going to kind of stick this theory in here because it doesn't look like I put it in. It doesn't. I personally don't think it's very likely. There is this whole, somebody has suggested this whole theory where they have the steps,
Mm-hmm.
That Barbara Barker and her husband killed Joan and buried her in a lot that they owned in Lexington, off the top of my head.
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, it's there. Basically.
Yeah.
They have denied this. The police didn't think it was, they never excavated the lot, so that tells me they didn't think it was very plausible. And I don't think that I don't think anybody has really mentioned a motive, which is also wild to me. So, and it is also important to note that, Barbara, a lot of her testimony goes into the timeline and stuff, but she was not the only person in the neighborhood. The next door neighbor was there, and the next door neighbor came over to help her look.
Yeah.
They dropped the kids off at another neighbor's house.
Yeah.
When they discovered
the scene.
Yeah. So I really don't think it's very likely. And again, the scream, no screaming, no reports of noise.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know. I don't think that's very likely personally.
Yeah,
but I think the next theory that the police jumped to was a robbery gone wrong, or yes, this was their first theory after suicide. Either robbery gone wrong, including an abduction,
Mm-hmm.
So apparently she didn't usually lock the house and was receptive to door-to-door salesmen. Some speculate that someone came into the home when she was out, or potentially she opened the door to a salesman. There's this specific theory that maybe someone came in to rob the house or whatever when she was out. And then when they came back, this person couldn't figure out a way out of the house without being seen. So they were kind of hiding. Joan somehow noticed or suspected someone's in the house. So she takes Lillian and Douglas over to Barbara's house, and returned home, maybe to get David, probably to get David. And, that would explain why she didn't talk to Barbara necessarily. Maybe not necessarily would explain that, but if she was like, I want to go run over and get David right now, rather than really quick run in and tell Barbara, oh, by the way, I think there's someone in the house, like, BRB. She just wants, like, I need to go and get my son, my child. So comes back in, and potentially this person has seen an opportunity and is trying to leave, and they run into each other. An attack happens. Some speculate again that her body was taken in Lexington. There's this specific lot that is mentioned in a couple different theories. But it makes less sense in this theory, I think.
Okay.
So potentially the sighting by Barbara, some think, is a lends credence to this in some ways, because with her arms out, I saw somebody had said, like, that's how you walk if you're, like, blindfolded or in some way blinded. So maybe that.
Yeah.
And this same source said it is more consistent with a stranger, but I don't know that that's true, being blindfolded.
Well, and also, like, in what way could they possibly blindfold you that you have your hands free, that you wouldn't be tearing that off?
Yes, yeah. And then in addition to that, Barbara,
blinded, yes.
Yeah, like, people were also saying, the trees could have blocked her view of another person, but she saw Joan through the trees.
Yeah.
So why wouldn't she have seen somebody else?
Yeah.
If there were unexplained beer bottles in the trash can, that might explain them. Although, how much time does this person have to just chill and drink beer?
Yeah.
Explain some of the smears in the blood. Doesn't explain how there is, like, nothing missing from the home. Most of the house was in order. It was just the kitchen that was
in disarray.
Yeah. Possibly, this person could have convinced her to get into the car because she was threatened, coerced, promised that they would take her to the hospital, at gunpoint, at knife point, whatever. She eventually either got out or was kicked out and wandered around in the streets until she was either recaptured or bled out. But I really don't think, if she just wandered away and died, that does not seem very likely to me, because her body was never found. You don't, like, this is brought up in a lot of cases where people suspect suicide. You don't hide your own body, like, it takes some specific circumstances to die in an accident and have your body never be found. And this was a very populated area. It was an area a lot of people passed through on their commute, it sounded like. So it doesn't seem very likely to me that she just wandered away and died and her body was never found, right? So this next theory was first thought of when it was discovered, when people actually looked at those 25 books that she checked out from the library. They were mostly, like, mysteries, thrillers, which this is like... yeah, I can see your face.
I'm not gonna lie, I tried really hard, but it was, like, literally a sentence below.
Yeah.
I kind of read ahead a ton a bit.
Yeah.
But I was thinking it, because I watch NCIS, and there's actually specific episodes where people do what you're about to talk about.
Yeah. So the theory here is, like, a lot of these books were about women who were murdered or disappeared. There was one particular book called Into Thin Air, is how it was published in the US. It was originally published in England under the name Put Out That Star by Harry Carmichael. I am mentioning all of those details because it took me a goddamn hour to figure out this frickin' book and, like, what it was called. Basically, it's about a woman, apparently. I've ordered the book, it hasn't come yet. This woman planned her own disappearance, left behind a bloody towel in an effort to confuse authorities. So the blurb on the back is, it started on the morning of Monday, February 27th. A blonde girl in a mink coat arrives at a famous London hotel. A beautiful girl, but a girl with a secret. From her secret sprang a chain of strange events, and a menace that reached out beyond the confines of suite number 15 until death struck twice and poised again. I love old mystery blurbs.
Book
This is
blurbs.
like at the height of the detective mystery craze, you know?
Yeah.
So basically it launches the theory that she gone girled.
Okay.
And this is like, I frequently feel if I ever went missing, this would be what people would think. Because
I wouldn't think that.
well, it's what like the authorities would think is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Because I read a shit ton of Agatha Christie and like other detective mysteries. I read a lot of true crime stuff. I am diagnosed with depression and anxiety. Like, they would think she ran off.
Mm-hmm.
The hint is if I didn't take my cats, I didn't.
Yeah.
But
yeah.
And I wouldn't anyway. But
yeah.
It's really just people take. It is an interest that if you are listening to this, you have. It is an interest that if you have looked up Joan Risch's case, you have. Like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and we haven't all gone girled.
No. I mean, like, here's...
Martin didn't think it was very likely. She said that she just really liked reading mysteries and suspense stories. A common thing.
Mm-hmm.
They wouldn't be popular if they weren't popular. And people are kind of torn on whether or not this is likely because some of her friends say that Joan really enjoyed being a stay-at-home mom and a homemaker, or at the absolute least they say she never would have abandoned her kids.
Mm-hmm.
But then some of her friends say that she regretted leaving her job and was just kind of like unfulfilled. But then the plan was always to return back to work. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, and then investigators never found any evidence that she wanted to leave. Any like concrete, like,
Mm-hmm.
it doesn't sound like she had a diary, but if she did, nothing of interest was in it.
Yeah.
So, articles at the time that mention the childhood house fire that killed her mom,
Mm-hmm.
her parents, I mean, as the ones that mention it as suspicious, also tend to like suggest this theory.
Mm-hmm.
They kind of cite her troubled past, that's in quotes, despite the fact that she seemed well adjusted. Like, she seemed like a normal person and devoted to her, devoted to her family. But then this also doesn't explain, like, why would she fake her disappearance in a way that was so traumatizing for her kids and her husband? Why would she choose a time with such a small and unpredictable window? Like, Lillian could have come back at any time. Barbara could have dropped by. David was about to wake up. Like, and if these sightings were of her, why would she risk being found by police? Like, nobody did stop.
Mm-hmm.
What if somebody had? She couldn't predict that nobody would stop. So next theory is a head injury or some other kind of injury, potentially that like resulted in severe blood loss, and then she wandered away confused and disoriented.
Uh-huh.
Along Route 128 at the time was an active construction site that was kind of close to the road.
Mm-hmm.
Some people wonder, like, maybe she fell into a pit and was accidentally buried. Maybe she was so disoriented that she couldn't get out. She couldn't call for help. Maybe she lost consciousness when she fell in.
Right.
It seems I don't know how construction sites work. It seems unlikely. I don't know.
I mean, I know modern day construction sites for the most part, but I don't know.
Yeah, at the time. Investigators never excavated the construction site, which seems like a overlooked thing, because it does seem possible enough that,
Yeah. It's like, why wouldn't you just, look?
Another interesting thing is that some resources, I can't confirm this, say that in early November, the Risch home got at least 12 calls from an unknown female. That Joan's father-in-law answered every single one of the calls, but the caller would not speak to him. Around that same, either the same day or just around the same time, a neighbor also got a call from a, quote, terribly excited woman stating that she'd been trying to call her house but didn't know the male voice who kept answering the phone. So it's like kind of suggested it could have been Joan. But nobody was like adamant that it was Joan. You know what I mean?
Right.
Nobody who answered the calls was like, oh yeah, it was totally Joan. Call tracing wasn't done. Apparently, it was actually kind of possible at the time through.
Really?
Yeah. Okay, it said, the source I found says it was, and I looked this up separate from the case, so like if that helps. Like, call tracing was kind of possible through phone companies in the 60s and 70s, but I did not see when in the 60s. And this was in 1961, so I don't know
60
for sure.
probably refers to at least 63.
Yeah. So we, again, can't verify that it actually happened, and it was also, like, easily could have been just a cruel prank.
Right.
One of the other popular theories is that she was attacked and suffered amnesia, or that she just had some sort of like episode. I'm a little tired of this theory because it is always kind of thrown out there.
Yeah.
What if she just wandered away?
Uh-huh.
It's, I guess it is also always possible. She didn't have any history of amnesia, no mental illness in her family or her family's histories. Martin did believe this. He was convinced that she was still alive, you know.
Oh.
But, you know, he thought that maybe she doesn't know who she is or how to get home. Blood evidence may be more consistent with someone kind of staggering around trying to support themselves. Maybe that explains the smears and that kind of thing. It would explain, in my opinion, giving, like, the trying to clean it and like quickly giving up, you know. Maybe that was her, although it does seem unlikely that she would have used David's overalls, you know. But maybe it was just like it's the first thing that she saw.
Yeah. Well, and then with that too, like if we're assuming that what was kind of on that chair is those overalls, you know, she didn't necessarily use them to clean. They just did, like you said, maybe they did just get blood on them. Supposition, who knows?
Yeah. So one of the more popular theories is that maybe she had an abortion. They were illegal at the time.
I was thinking miscarriage, actually.
They were both theories.
Okay.
Actually. So abortions were illegal at the time, which generally resulted in people who were seeking out like kind of sketchy people. Even if they were real good doctors, like the doctors were good at being doctors, you know, they weren't necessarily performed in sterile conditions, and you can't necessarily give good post-operative care in those situations. She didn't necessarily have the opportunity to like rest. Also important to mention that because they were illegal to have, illegal to perform, if something happens, a doctor is not incentivized to seek help for their patient. Like, there are lots of shit that goes wrong for the doctor if they accidentally kill somebody doing an illegal operation.
Yeah.
So it is to the doctor's advantage to just cover it up. Yeah.
Yeah. Honestly, to me, so far, that is frankly the most likely. It's actually kind of the one that's been spinning in the back of my head since the start, was I wonder if she had a miscarriage or like a botched abortion.
Yes.
Because a miscarriage won't produce that much blood. In theory.
Unless she was hemorrhaging.
Exactly. Which then, if she was hemorrhaging, how the fuck was she able to walk?
Yeah. Also, you know, people who did see blood on the woman who was walking down the streets, they said it was running down her legs.
Which is what kind of made me start thinking that.
Yes, yeah. Not gonna lie, I also had considered this before I reached, like, the first time I ever heard about this case, I had also considered it before it was mentioned. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, the theory goes basically she hires someone and then she walks, or on the day and time that it's supposed to happen, she walks the two older kids across the street while David is sleeping.
Sorry, I just had a thought.
Yeah.
Same car, October 19th.
Oh, yes, yeah.
Because realistically, what if the procedure had been performed on the 19th? She started not feeling so hot.
Oh.
And then was like, yo, something's wrong.
Okay. I like that too.
That
I potentially think
that's
maybe,
compelling.
Yeah, that's compelling, yes.
Sorry, I had my
your epiphany moment.
My little light bulb.
Yeah. Your little gray cells. Need to get you a fucking Poirot book. Anyway.
I'm sorry.
So the theory continues that she is expecting it to be like a really short procedure.
Mm-hmm.
In clinic, abortions take 5 to 10 minutes. Maybe, she could have been assured by the doctor it'll be quick. Everything is going to be like it's going to be quick, simple. Everything's going to be fine.
Right.
She, something goes wrong. Joan goes to call for help. The doctor panics, rips the phone off the wall, takes Joan in his car to drop off at a hospital or to leave her for dead on the road.
Right.
Maybe this had also occurred to me. Maybe she jumped out of the car. Or
it's certainly possible.
It could have been like she's so disoriented that they stop at a stoplight and she wanders out.
She's like, nah, mate.
Bye. Which also could potentially explain the blood on her legs.
Yes.
But I also think it makes sense that the blood is from the scene because she was bleeding at the scene too.
Yes. I'm not swayed by either theory.
Yeah.
Thus far.
Beer. The beer bottles potentially used as kind of like a anesthesia, which I don't necessarily find that compelling because she didn't have a lot of time to chug down a 6-pack,
Yeah. Well, that, and then you also, okay, no.
But potentially it could have had something mixed in,
I just, from the photos, I'm going to relate this back to here, is when you look at the photos of the trash can and they say that they finished that bottle of liquor that night.
The night
before.
Apparently they each had like half a glass and it was already pretty close to empty.
Because that liquor bottle is right on top.
Yes.
And other than the pack, of which you can very clearly see that is the Miller Lite logo, currently upside down, that's not a can or a bottle of beer.
A bean can.
It does. So I am more inclined to believe that the beer has fucking nothing to do with it.
Yes.
Fuck all to do with it.
Yeah.
Frankly.
So, there are basically 2 other theories that are kind of related to that. Mm-hmm. Maybe she had a miscarriage or she gave birth. Because it is possible for women to be unaware that they are pregnant.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Maybe she had a miscarriage or gave birth really early. She
incredible preemie.
Early enough that she might not have realized that she was late on her period,
Well, and also not so TMI. My mom actually had periods with me while she was pregnant with me. She had no idea she was pregnant with me. Until I want to say 4 months.
Oh my gosh.
Maybe.
That would be terrifying.
Yeah. So
okay.
Talk about surprise, baby.
Yeah, so that's also possible.
So, I mean,
and it is it is totally possible for women to just not really grow a belly. It
is incredibly possible.
Mm-hmm. And maybe she didn't recognize that she was pregnant. She started to miscarry. She started to hemorrhage, is basically how this theory goes.
Mm-hmm.
And panics, She wasn't known to be pregnant at the time. There was also no real evidence that she was opposed to having another child. And additionally, this comes back to she has a really busy day in a very short and unpredictable window.
Yes.
Why would she schedule
that?
An abortion at that time?
It just seems implausible. But again, kind of going back to now, thinking about what if it had been done previously. How many days before was... So this was...
The 19th was 5 days before the 24th.
Let's look this up. Let's see.
So, while you're doing that, pretty much everybody who saw Joan that day said that she was in really good spirits, and it seems weird to me that she would be in such a good mood and wouldn't seem anxious at all, because the dentist specifically said she didn't seem anxious or worried. So why, even if you knew it was a common, like a simple procedure, why wouldn't you be a little nervous?
Mhm.
You're getting an illegal surgery basically performed, an illegal operation.
Yes. So, according to USCF Health, you may bleed up to a week or off and on up to 4 weeks after the procedure. Now, with that being said, that is medical grade standard current.
And
performed legally.
And that is on a normal situation.
Yes.
If you could bleed hypothetically up to 4 weeks, I could see something going wrong 5 days after.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Actually, I think that's probably...
I think that's really compelling. I'm glad you said that, because I didn't think of it. Yeah. So...
happy to help.
Yeah. So I personally think that one of those theories, either, giving, premature giving birth, miscarriage, hemorrhage after an abortion, all of that seems likely. Maybe she recognizes that she's bleeding. By the way, no blood in the bathroom. So that was mentioned in a lot of sources.
That is odd, yeah.
But hypothetically, I'm thinking, she goes to the bathroom, she recognizes she's bleeding, she's in pain. She cleans it up because she doesn't want anybody to know that she's had this illegal procedure.
Right. Makes sense.
Maybe she does that when she calls the doctor. She calls the doctor, she goes back, she cleans up, she walks Lillian and Douglas over so that they're out of the house when the abortionist comes over. She doesn't want to mention it to Barbara because she doesn't want...
They're not there yet.
Yeah.
And again, very illegal procedure. Probably wouldn't even...
She doesn't want her paying attention, basically.
Yeah.
The doctor shows up. They go to do, either they go to check something out, or something just really bad. She starts really hemorrhaging.
Yeah.
And that's when she goes to call someone. The phone is ripped off the wall,
Yeah.
And maybe she was so disoriented and she had lost so much blood at the time that she didn't remember there are no emergency we haven't written anything down on this page.
Right, yeah, because they're still new to the area. Mm-hmm. They haven't, settled down, so to speak, yet.
Yeah. I think that's very likely. That's, I think, the one that fits most of the scenario, because I really do think when you come to looking at the things that look like a struggle, could also be somebody staggering around
from blood loss.
Yeah. Or just disoriented and confused. Mm-hmm. Because I don't know how much blood you need to lose to feel dizzy and disoriented. And
that's just
because I don't think it's much, really.
Well, okay. And some people are not chill with the sight of blood.
Yeah.
How my search history today. How much blood do you have to lose to feel dizzy. Most adults can lose up to 14% of their blood without experiencing any major side effects or changes in vital signs. Some, however, may feel lightheaded or dizzy if this amount is lost quickly.
Okay, so now how much blood is in the human body?
It's a disturbing number.
1.2 to 1.5 gallons.
And they said anywhere from half a pint to a pint.
Yes. So around 10.5 pints. So that's not that much. But it also could be, like, whatever did happen, she could have had a head injury on top of that. I think it is compelling that, like, she was wearing a scarf.
Yeah.
Easily could have been
trying
put
to
around
hide.
her to hide. Yeah.
Yes. Especially if we're going with the doctor theory of someone, trying to, you don't want someone to be looking past and be like, that woman's got a head injury in his car. Let me go ahead and call.
Yeah.
Well,
not that I,
call the police.
So, in addition, investigators ended up collecting fingerprints from 5,000 people.
Holy jeez.
Never found, really, it didn't seem like anybody that they thought was probably at the scene. Just one more wrench I wanted to throw in that I saw mentioned in an article. Lillian did spend some time in the house between Barbara dropping her off and arriving back.
Yeah.
Is it possible that she tried to clean up the blood?
Certainly.
Which, that is the speculation that gets me, that I think is very sad.
That's because it is.
Yeah.
But then also...
And it also explains why there's, like, if it was her, it would explain why maybe she tried to use David's overalls because she's 4,
Yeah, she doesn't understand.
Why the whole roll is on the floor.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I don't think that Lillian ever necessarily said she tried to clean it up. She's also 4.
That, and well, she would probably have blood on her hands, and
that's true.
Oh, there was no footprints or shoe prints in the blood,
so she probably didn't even get that far in. So it is, like, I guess it is possible, especially if she...
I'd be interested to see the layout of the house.
Yeah.
Because even if because she said there's red paint.
And Mommy's gone. She did say David's in bed. So she did walk back.
Yeah.
Or she heard him crying and knew it was coming from
the bedroom.
But she did say her mom is gone. So does that mean that she stood in the entryway and she shouted for her mom and her mom never responded? So as a 4-year-old, she assumed Mommy's gone, or Mommy...
Mom not home.
Yeah. Mom is gone and I am scared.
Yes. Help.
Yeah.
That's...
Yeah. That is a good point, though.
Because that kid would not have any concept.
Yeah.
Of... More than likely wouldn't have a concept. Let's put it that way.
So, in the aftermath, Martin never declared Joan dead. They didn't move out of the house until the National Park Service, purchased it and several other houses in the area in 1975 to make a park. Yeah. That does tie back to the...
No, sorry, I was looking at the next thing.
They always kept the same number, hoping that someday he would hear Joan's voice, which is very sad. They, after they sold the house, they moved to Lexington in Massachusetts. He never remarried. He went to the grave believing that his wife was still alive. He died in 2009 after a long illness. And at that time, Lillian had married and had one daughter. David grew up to be a poet. And he says he likes to think that his mom is in heaven and that she's happy. So, if you do have any tips, the Lincoln Police Department can be reached at 781-259-8111. And the case number is 61-2623. Her case is still open but unsolved. And again, that phone number is 781-259-8111. So, I think we kind of know what we're both thinking. But what are your thoughts?
I definitely, okay, so originally I was like, okay, could it be, you know, yeah, could there be an affair, something went wrong, could it be, you know, a miscarriage, abortion, could it be an instance of her, like, faking her own death and disappearance? Honestly, honest to God, I am most compelled by the fact that it was probably a botched abortion.
Mm-hmm.
They were much more common, illegally common.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, because they were illegal.
Exactly. Because, you know, just because you ban abortions doesn't mean that people won't get them. All you're doing is
and it's
banning
also
safe ones.
Important to note that just because half a pint or however much they found at the scene isn't a lot of blood, that doesn't mean
she didn't keep on bleeding.
She didn't keep on bleeding, that she didn't lose more and it was cleaned up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's necessarily as likely,
yeah.
But
yeah, I think that
even if you're not losing a lot of blood, if you continue to lose blood, that is bad.
I think the weirdest thing about this is that after all of this, she still hasn't been found.
Yeah, even the body, that's the weirdest thing to me.
Yeah.
That tells me somebody else was involved, because again, you don't hide your own body.
No. Well, you can't.
Yeah.
You know?
Especially if there was some sort of accident. She's not trying to.
Yeah.
So yeah, I definitely think
somebody else was definitely involved.
I like that you had pointed out it could have been the 19th, because that explains if she was in good spirits, not expecting something bad to happen, thinking everything was perfectly fine, and then she started to hemorrhage. Like, this is a normal day, and then she started to hemorrhage. That would also explain why she would, quote unquote, choose such a narrow window and unpredictable window of time, because she wasn't choosing the time. She was just bleeding.
It was a medical emergency that was forced upon her. I think, to me, that is definitely the most significant.
Yeah, that definitely sounds the most compelling to me.
Yeah.
But let us know your thoughts.
Share in the comments of wherever you're listening to this, if you can. Rate and review, so others like you can find.
Like and subscribe.
Yeah.
This has been the case of Joan Risch, the disappearance of a 30-year-old housewife and mother of two in 1961 in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Thank you for listening to today's episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears, recorded and produced by Ollie and Belle.
Please check out all of our social media where we have additional information shared. You can find all of those links at our website at awmpa.com.
We'd love to hear your feedback for our podcast, so be sure to rate and review.
Tune in next week for another episode of A Wild Mystery Podcast Appears.